Most Australians think retirement is simple. Work hard, pay off your home, build a nest egg, then spend carefully so you don't run out of money. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of people do retirement backwards. They spend their healthiest years accumulating. Then when they finally have the money, they've got less energy, less mobility, and fewer meaningful chances to use it well. And at the same time, we're watching a quiet shift in Australia. Inheritances and the bank of mum and dad are starting to matter as much as income. So the big question is not just how to retire, but it's when should you spend your money? When should you give off your money to future generations? And what does this all got to do with family and society? So welcome to today's episode of Demographics Decoded, the show where each week we unveil the trends shaping our future. Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and as always, I'm joined by leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher. And together each week we dig into the data, actually below the data, to uncover the trends shaping our economies, our communities, our future prosperity, and what this means for your business, your investments, and your future. Simon, today I'd like to talk about a provocative idea that you wrote about a little while ago in the New Daily. It's not behind a paywall, so I'll leave a link to it in the show notes. And it's the concept of die with zero. Not a call to be reckless, but a challenge on how to think about money, time, purpose, housing and legacy. You, I guess, got the idea from a book, didn't you?
Yes. Again, this is, whenever I read a book, I feel like this must be forced into a column. I got a weekly column to write, so this is always important. But this book really spoke to me it's a very American book. If you read it or if you listen to it, Bill Perkins is the author, who is unmistakably an American, very, very American language, very American sense of optimism and power and drive in the book. But it's a rather profound and wonderful concept. The main argument has to do with, ideally, you would die on the day that you spent your last dollar, because you don't get any bonus points if you die with a lot of money. You can't take this money into the afterlife or into the void of nothingness, whatever you believe in. So the problem, of course, is that you don't know when you die. And we are terribly
Yes.
afraid of running out of money in old age. And so we tend to accumulate. We want to hold on to our wealth. The problem, though, is, let's say you die with $1 million. So you spend some sort of effort and time to accumulate this $1 million instead of enjoying the $1 million. So that's a bit of a mismatch. Maybe you could say, maybe the enjoyment is handing the $1 million on your deathbed to your kids or to a charity. Maybe that's your ideal way of doing it. But he says, even then, you don't get to enjoy it because you die. Ideally, you hand over money to the next generation or to the worthy cause while you are young, while you're still alive, while you're able to see the joy of, well, I'm supporting my grandkids' school fees. And I see this, they can afford a great education. It sets them up for life because of my wonderful contribution. Or if I have a charitable cause, why would I not want to help those people that I want to help out now? Why would I want to say, I really want to help you, but sucks to be you for the next 10 years before I die? That is a bizarre concept. So it says, like, try to do this as much as you can now. And of course, it very much depends on the amount of money that you have, how much this is able. But that's the quick, I think, the Spartan summary of this book, if you will.
So it's not really about blowing your money or gambling with your future. It's about aligning your money with your life stage, what you're able to do,
Yeah.
with your health, but also with purpose. So I've often mentioned that I've helped all our kids with accommodation, and I now pay my grandkids' school fees. And boy, that's expensive. But I'd rather give now than with a warm hand and see the pleasure of it than later on in life when I'm not around to see it. But why do so many Australians underspend in retirement, even when they can afford to spend more? What's going on in their mind?
Well, I think the modern way of putting it is a scarcity mindset rather than an abundance mindset. Is the idea that you are afraid of spending this money, and maybe you're just not used to this. Maybe just you got hooked into the idea of accumulating, and this can take many forms. In the property market, many of us will live in Australia next to a widow in her 80s and 90s who lives on a very expensive plot of land.
Yeah.
Her property is worth $1.5 million or $2 million or something like this, but she's on the pension. So she's asset rich and cash poor. She could theoretically move to a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment and have heaps more money available to spend. So she could have a much richer, economically richer retirement, but she doesn't choose to do so. And you go, well, she could travel. She could try to, see her Italian hometown one more time or something like this, but she does. And you go, well, how are you better served here? What's best in your interest? It's fully up to each person to decide what might be um, the way there. And of course, people also don't spend money in retirement because they are afraid to run out of money. They're afraid that healthcare shocks, that aged care spending might escalate in the future.
Yes.
So they hold on to the money. Yeah. And so these, being obsessed about uncertainty, that is, of course, a very logical, rational way of doing it, but it can just become this default excuse to not spend money at all. And then you in a sense, rob yourself of experiences. So that's the general argument about spending money. But there's also a really nice argument that Bill Perkins makes in the books about front-loading experiences. And so what he means by this is that you have a really nice experience. We're saying something like this big overseas trip that you might have in your gap year. And so you go on this gap year, you blow all the little savings that you have, you earn a bit of money, you have a couple of crazy adventures along the way. What happened there is, of course, this happened in those couple of months in this year, but then you have maybe 70 years worth of remembering this thing left in you. And you get this wonderful benefit of reliving those experiences. So he says, continue to front load experiences, particularly in your formative years, which is the early 20s and so forth, because you will actually reap the rewards later in life. And this fits in quite nicely with the modern idea of, they call this the micro retirements, where you take not a gap year, because sometimes you can't afford this, but you take a gap quarter of a year,
Yes.
and really just enjoy it while the kids are young or whatever, or while you're just mobile enough still to travel, rather than say something like, I will live through all of this in retirement. I'm sure many, many listeners here will have relatives that diligently followed the career ladder and then they died in the early 60s or late 60s and they didn't get to enjoy the 20 years of retirement. That's a shame in a sense. Yeah. So that's part of the argument to front load experiences. I'm a big fan of this concept. And of course, do this within your means. Don't go into debt in order to front load experiences, anything like
Of
this. This
course.
would be financially naive, I would argue.
Well, once a year we get together with a group of successful business people and entrepreneurs at Wealth Retreat. And that's happening again at the end of May this year on the Gold Coast. I'll leave a link in the show notes if you want to join Simon and me at wealthretreat.com.au. But mindset's very important. And I know a lot of people build their businesses and a large portfolio because they start off with a drive, a passion, but they've got to then move from the scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. In fact, most successful investors do have an abundant mindset. But in your article, you actually discuss well the time value of money and how that changes over your life. Money's more valuable, as you've said, when you can buy experiences, when you can physically enjoy it. It gets harder as you get older. And I love the word you said a moment ago about if you don't do it, it actually robs you of the opportunity of having those memory dividends, spending it when you can. I know my wife, Pam, takes hundreds of photos. We've just come back a short while ago from a vacation, thousands of photos, but she then looks at them, reorganizes them, relives the experience. And we do that occasionally too, where she puts it up on the TV screen. So rather than watching TV, we actually look through those lovely journeys we've had together. So I like the concept that you say, creating memories, but also it's also great to be able to give to charity as we do and to give to our kids. But if you had to pick the best decade in one's life to spend on experiences, what is it? Is there sometimes that are better than others?
Well, so this is my personal thing, as I already mentioned, the formative years. So this is the early 20s. The idea of a gap year, I think, is absolutely excellent because you build character and you create those lifelong memories. So that is very, very good. The problem, of course, is that you're utterly broke all the time and
Yes.
that you operate on shoestring budgets all the time. That's cool. That also builds you creativity and whatnot. Then you have your kids in your 30s and 40s. That's difficult. But so in the 50s and 60s, you're still strong. You're physically healthy. You have all this stuff, but you also created a bit of economic power, spending power. And you can then just travel nicely and do all of those things. So don't think that these are don't waste your 50s on 60s on waiting to retire. Use them wisely to actually travel there a lot. And so this is where we talk about the early retirements or the micro retirements. Feed them into your 50s and 60s. Again, assuming that you can afford this. We're not talking about there's a certain kind of element of privilege that comes out of these arguments, because if you're just barely holding the head above water, don't do it. Then just, don't drown. But if you have a bit of money to spare, I think that is a wise choice. Of course, don't blow it, all the savings or something. Do it in a financially responsible way, but don't desperately hold on to something that you can most certainly not take into the grave with you. And so in the later years, your spending will shift, and your thinking and your concerns will shift, and you will stay much more local, and your desire to travel actually shrinks. 40s and 50s save, and you think that you will have this insane desire to travel in your 70s. You have to listen to people in their 70s that say, I'm actually a bit more comfortable to travel less than I would have expected. And so then you never traveled, then you never did it. And so I think that's important. And this is a lesson that so Sarah and my wife and I learned this just we were at uni at the time. We had some sort of little weekend trip and bought a super fancy jar of marmalade jam, maybe 4 times as expensive as that small town market thing than we would have ever. And you're like, oh, this is a fancy jam, so we can't just randomly eat it on toast for breakfast. And so we never did. And then the jam went off. And so essentially you blew a whole lot of money on a shitty jam that you never ate. And so this jam actually was well worth the investment, because we constantly reframe this and like, is this worth holding on to, or is this just another jam that we're wasting? Yeah, so that's our little code within the family, is to think wisely when to spend, and don't always hold on to things for too long.
I like that idea. I know Pam got a very fancy bottle of Dom Perignon champagne many years ago for her 60th birthday. That was unfortunately quite some time ago, and she's still holding on to it and wondering, oh, is it too late now? Has it gone off? So I better get her to drink it. But let's talk about the bank of mum and dad. Why is helping kids earlier often far more powerful than leaving them an inheritance later, Simon?
So there is a purely financial reason, and there is an emotional reason. The first one is, why wouldn't you want to see how your money helps your kids? I think there's a certain kind of joy and pride in this.
Yes.
So and that then provides you with joy that you can carry in your heart, but also financially, your kids need the money when they are in the purchasing of the home, when they have school fees to provide for their kids, or something like this, the expensive family formation stage years. And of course, I always bring the simple mathematical example there. If you have a 30-year mortgage on 5.3% on average along the term of the loan, then you pay exactly twice the amount of the loan to the bank. So a $500,000 mortgage is $1 million that you pay to the bank over the 30 years. So that, of course, means that if you give $100,000 to your kids, yes, you give them $100,000, so it costs you $100,000, but your kids get a $200,000 benefit. So there's an outrageously attractive financial proposition. The bank of mom and dad is such a popular thing because within the family unit as a whole, it is such a powerful tool. So I would say, if you have the capacity to act as the bank of mom and dad, don't hesitate. It is really well worth it. It sets your kids up for rather nice success. If you compare two families, one that are identical, young families, if you minimize one's family mortgage size, that compounds like crazy in terms of life benefits. So yeah, help your kids in their 30s if you can.
Clearly, that's happening more and more. The statistics show that. Unfortunately, it's creating a group of haves and have-nots and inequality in families. It becomes intergenerational, doesn't it?
Very much so. And so helping your kids through inheritance can be very, very dangerous. So what I mean by this, so it is the most common reason for siblings not to talk to each other is a fight over the inheritance. And so that means that, and you can test this. So you can write the most perfect will where you say, upon my death, sell all the properties that I own, sell all the cars that I own, and then divide it equally across the three siblings or whatever. It sounds perfectly just and fair to you. But you must remember that your kids will also sell all the other stuff that you own. Or they will share them. They will not, maybe not sell it, but they will share it between them. And you can play the game. Pick 100 random items of your somewhat worthy items out of your house and value them. And you put a value on. We say this table is worth $1,000, $2,000, and then have your kids value it, and they will come up with different valuations. And so the packages that you give to your kids, they will perceive the different values. And so these are the options where some people can feel underserved, mistreated in this kind of heritage process, and that's a problem. Well, that's only a problem if you leave them to do it. So the more of a hand you have in the process, the fairer you can actually divide these things up, the more you can have a control over this. So it's also, again, very, very good to do this while you are alive. You probably help your family system as a whole to stay peaceful by doing this.
Yes, it's unfortunate how many sibling rivalry arguments occur once the money has to be split. Now, in your article, you make the point that downsizing eventually, as you get older, the last decades of your life, isn't just a money decision. What really is it all about?
Part of this argument is that you then absolutely minimize the amount of stuff that you have, which is, first and foremost, it is a favor to the next generation. Because if you die in a gigantic house with a gigantic amount of stuff, it is a nightmare for your kids to sort through this. So that's you rid the next generation of a burden. That is good. But it also means you do not need to live for your stuff. There is lots and lots of freeing that you free up mental and just capacity, attention capacity, if you minimize your stuff. And you then actually live a bit of a more focused life in old age. So that tends to be a very, very positive feedback that people give once they have downsized. So do not underestimate the power of that.
Do you know when is the right time to downsize, though, Simon? Why do most people leave it a bit late?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. It's very difficult to get the timing right, and it's always annoying to do this. There's a lot of effort involved in moving home and downsizing and getting rid of stuff, and so I very, very much understand the desire to procrastinate on this. Yeah, I totally get it, and I might well be guilty of this myself in a couple of decades. But my life goal, of course, is to very much do not accumulate too much stuff and to constantly rid the house like a snake sheds its skin every year. I want to do the same and constantly get rid of stuff to not accumulate too many belongings. I don't know when the perfect time is, and I don't want to tell people when the perfect time is. But I would argue, do it as long as as long as both partners are still physically active and healthy. This is absolutely crucial. This is linked to my whole argument about the need of downsizing in the 70s to move into a walkable community, because that is so linked to positive health and mental health outcomes, that this is a no-brainer, and we should be doing it more as a country.
Now, Simon, I know you spend a lot of time in your job as a demographer looking at these sort of things. We're talking at the moment about personal matters, dying with zero, passing your money on. But at the demographic group, you have a much bigger picture. What is it that you do, and how do you help your clients?
Yeah, but so we always want to try to first understand our clients. What are they? What does the business need? Well, how does the business make money? What is the purpose of the organization, of the government that we're dealing with? And then we go, well, now we really try to show you your world through the demographic lens. We show you all the demographic data, all the consumer data, all the economic data that we have access to, and show how these things will impact the likely development of your neck of the woods, of your slice of the economy over the next decades. And then we try to adjust certain kind of behavior, certain kind of strategies to make sure that your business is more prosperous in the next bit.
At the Metropole Property Group, we help our clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth. But Ken Race, my business partner at Metropole Wealth Advisory, spends a lot of time advising older people about how to pass on their wealth to their children and grandchildren safely, how to structure things and make sure, firstly, it's tax effective, but it also gives them the results they want. So we do much more than just help people buy investment properties or homes. If you're interested in your financial future, whether it is passing on to future generations or it's to build it up so you can pass it on, go to metropole.com.au. Leave a link in the show notes. We're much more than buyer's agents. Use strategic structures, advice to help you grow your wealth and outperform the averages. Now, Simon, in your article, you also talked about a shifting tax system that you think in the future we're going to be more taxed towards wealth rather than income, maybe land tax style thinking, maybe inheritance taxes. What are the forces pushing us in that direction?
So the idea there is that you go, we run out of income to tax because we get ever smaller working cohorts, and we've got to find tax from somewhere. And so you would then try to tax, you would then want to try to tax wealth in some sort of way. We also, of course, create this bigger wealth gap. We have a shrinking middle class, rising number of poor and rich people. So you can recreate the middle class through the tax system, by taxing richer people more, but you don't do just income rich people. You want to tax wealth in some way or form. So this, of course, would mean that a land tax would be the easiest way of taxing property, because that's the one type of wealth that cannot be hidden. You might be able to, through some sort of business structures, hide other wealth. So I would expect that this happens. But of course, we want to think about why you do this. So what pushes us into this direction? And so you have the wealth gaps. You have, just by general, you have asset rich old people and asset poor young people, and you want a stable revenue as a government. So you go, well, where do I get this from? And of course, year after year, we'll see a larger number of Australians renting. So they, of course, have no problem with land being taxed, for example, or property being taxed in some way or form.
No.
So this becomes politically more feasible. And then I put myself in the shoes of a government that says it wants to reduce the intergenerational inequality, but it doesn't want to destroy the desire, the aspiration of a country to create wealth. It's like, oh, well, what can you do then? And I think one tax that I would get rid of is kill off stamp duty, or reduce it an awful lot. That would improve mobility. That would allow more people to downsize. That would potentially put more older people motivate them to downsize, which ultimately we know is also positive on average for their mental health and so forth. Then you can add a couple of supply settings so that you encourage more housing in the right spots. You want to, of course, not punish productivity. And that is the idea of essentially, if you were to get rid of income tax as a thought experiment, every additional dollar that you earn is fully yours. And so you go, how do we do this? How do we really encourage people to work at a really high level? And so I think we would see less income tax, less reliance on income tax would be one of the government goals that I'm foreseeing. Yeah. And then, of course, you must understand that those settings, they're not one hit wonders. These are boring long-term settings. They take decades to really take effect. I wouldn't want to cut through the system in one big motion. I would slowly want to shift the system. And so that would be attractive in the long run. It would be really poor for political slogans, for quick one size fits all type problem solving things.
Maybe one way of doing it slowly is actually reducing or decreasing or getting rid of stamp duty on your final home. We know that baby boomers stay in their homes for a number of reasons, but one of them is the huge impost and loss when you actually move one property to another. You don't have to pay capital gains tax on your home, but you often have to pay very large amounts of stamp duty. So maybe removing the stamp duty on your final home would be a way. Simon, what is the single biggest myth you think Australians have about retirement in the context of this die with zero?
Well, I guess the probably biggest one is, yeah, I'll do it later. You
Yes.
quite often won't. So this is the idea of do it now. If you consider downsizing, do it now. If you want to help your kids financially, do it now. If you want to give to charity, do it now. So this is linked to the obsession of potentially over preserving capital at all costs. And it's okay to liquidate assets and help your kids now. You don't need to hand your full property portfolio over to your kids. You can also just hand over a bit of money now and enjoy a bit of money for yourself and whatever. Yeah, maybe take out an insurance if you are really obsessed about potentially needing all the money for some sort of thing later. Maybe you don't, maybe you do, who knows? So I think the I'll do it later, that would be difficult. Yeah.
Well, I want to wrap all this up in just a second, but before I do, to those people watching or listening, if you don't currently subscribe to this podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to this, click the follow or subscribe button so that each week you get Simon and my information about your future. And if you know somebody who you think would benefit from this as well, just pass it on in every app, whether it's YouTube or the podcast apps. There's a share button. Tell somebody about Demographics Decoded. And if you'd like to catch up with Simon and me, remember, Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast at the end of May this year would be a great way of doing that. But I guess what I got as a takeaway from our discussion today, Simon, is retirement isn't just a financial plan. What you're suggesting is you should make it more a life plan. So the real question isn't how much can I die with? The real question is how much life can I live responsibly with the money I've created? In Australia right now, this matters more than ever because housing has changed the maths for the next generation. Helping your kids at the right time, you explained, is really transformational. But it also highlights the growing divide where family balance sheets are starting to matter more than even hard work and income. So the challenge is to be intentional. Design your spending about the years when you can actually enjoy it. Be strategic about how and when you help your family and make housing and lifestyle decisions to protect your health, your connections and your independence in that last decade, because dying with zero is not really the point. I guess the point you're trying to make, Simon, is live with purpose and make your money do its job while you still can, while you're still here.
Absolutely. This is deliberate, the idea that you have a choice while you are still active, while you have the capacity to do so. I think do that. People report wonderful well-being if they do so. So it's a better choice than to pretend that you'll do it later.
Well, Simon, I look forward to catching up with you next week for our regular weekly Demographics Decoded podcast.
Wonderful. I'll see you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.